Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we get mental with the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for your behavior problems, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Hey animal training enthusiasts, it's Barbara Heidenreich with a great episode all about falconry. Al Kordowski and I talked so much, I actually had to break this into a two-parter, so you're going to hear part one this time around. And don't forget to stick around for one of your animal training questions. This time, we're going to talk about sloth training and how to work with two individuals who have a different opinion about animal training. So stick around for your questions answered at the end of the episode. And don't forget, you can submit your question, your animal training question, on the episode webpage. So let's get into this interview all about falconry. Okay, Barbara Heidenreich here, and this time I have Al Kordowski with me, and we're going to talk about a very fascinating topic. We're going to talk about falconry, and some people may not be familiar with falconry, so we're going to dive into that topic a little bit deeper. But before we do, Al, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background, because you have a very fascinating background, in my opinion.
Well, Barbara, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited about talking about a topic that I'm thrilled about. It's become a lifelong hobby. I started off as a kid collecting snakes and lizards. So animals were in my DNA since a little youngster. I got a chance to be a part of the inaugural class of Moore Park College, which is exotic animal training and management. Not really sure what I wanted to do other than maybe I wanted to work with gorillas and elephants. Coordinator of the program, who actually started, Bill Brisby, pulled me aside one day and said, hey, there's this company down in San Diego. They call themselves SeaWorld. They need somebody to go out to Florida and work with the killer whales. And I was like, okay. And I'm thinking that's not necessarily what my focus was going to be. Went down there, watched them do a show, and I was hooked. 30 or 32 years later, I retired from SeaWorld. Spent a lot of time, got a chance to work with all the marine mammals. The other thing was I was at a part, kind of the cowboy days. I started off when we weren't using a lot of positives. We were in a weird world, but the thing was we wanted to get in the water with killer whales, and we had to change the way our focus was. So we had to get into the world of positives so we could, get out of the water safely every time we went into the water, and developed a lot of great programs. The husbandry that's being used today, where it's all trained and the animals are voluntarily participating, we started doing that years ago. The staple in all the animal industries, even the dog industry, but we started it way back in the 80s. We found some great redirection techniques. We were a part of we actually developed it and worked on the least reinforcing scenario, which changed the focus of people and animals and how they work together to reduce stress and frustration during learning. We got a chance to do some incredible stuff with different animals together, working dolphins with killer whales, having sea lions riding killer whales, having African fish eagles as a part of the show. Just an incredible journey. Retired, and I was hired to go out to the Middle East into Dubai and establish their first interactive dolphin program. And we had the largest intercoastal dolphin program in the world. It was fabulous. Got a chance to help write the laws on dolphin interactions, safe, a really safe environment for the dolphins and for the people. And left there, went to work for a zoo for a while. Got a chance to look at the differences in the zoo and the marine mammal world and how they differed, and how there's still a lot of the old guard, so to speak, in there that, are not necessarily about trying to train the animals, but just, hopefully just keep it on exhibit and feed them and take, care of them. But if they had any medical needs, it was about restraint. So we worked on that. And then I got into the service dog world, kind of pre-retirement. And got a chance to take a look at different ways that we can incorporate what we've developed over the years in the marine mammal industry and introduce it into the service dog side of elements that we were working on, and focusing on relationship. I mean, that's the focus. And I'm retired now, getting a chance to talk a little bit more about what I've been able to work for, and develop with a lot of different animals over the years. And it leads us to where we are today, which is my favorite hobby in the whole planet, and that's falconry. And I've been doing that for 35 years, and I'll be doing it until I can't walk anymore.
Absolutely fascinating stuff there. Well, since you mentioned falconry, I think maybe a good thing to do would be maybe define exactly what is falconry, because there's probably some people out there that don't really know what that means.
It's about taking game with a wild or a captive bred bird of prey. And it's really about working together in a cohesive environment. It's one of the most fascinating things that I think I've ever had a chance to do, because you have this raptor, and I fly primarily Harris's hawks, and you're out in the wild and you are working together as a team. They have every opportunity to make a decision to go somewhere else, but they want to be in our environment. And it's really fun to be able to be out actually actively working. And I've never thought I would say the word anthropomorphic when I'm out there, but I truly believe that there's this really great connection that happens between the actual falconer and the bird that they're flying.
What are some of the other kinds of birds that people sometimes fly in falconry?
Barbara, interesting enough, you have to be permitted and licensed to falcon. You have to go through a 2-year apprenticeship. And a sponsor helps you to dictate that. So in your very beginning as an apprentice, your limits to what the state is allowing for an apprentice to have for a first year. Primarily a red tail, a kestrel. In the state of Texas, you can also possess a Harris's hawk. So with that kind of dictates where you start off and where you begin to get your experience. So it gives you a chance to work with a small falcon, but it also gives you a chance to interact with the short wing or the dirt hawking, so to speak, birds. But it leads into the long wings, the big falcons, the peregrine falcon, the sacred falcon, the apamados. It leads into a totally, unique and different way of actually interacting and hunting. But primarily, those are the birds that would be used for falconry.
And what's the difference with flying Harris's hawks? Because it seems to me there's a different style of falconry when you work with Harris's hawks.
You're so absolutely right. It is really different. Just got back from a trip yesterday from flying out west. And the interesting part of the subject is when you're flying the Harris's hawk, we're called dirt hawkers. And basically what that means is we're in the dirt with these guys. We're basically chasing rabbit, jackrabbit, quail, pheasant, stuff like that. The falcons a lot of them are duck hawkers, so they're looking for ponds. They're flying off the ponds. Flying with the Harris's hawks, you're kind of right there together with them the whole time. You're within 2 inches of them to 3 feet to a mile. You're within those distances and you're all traveling together. On the falconry side, if you're flying your long wing, you're looking at putting your falcon up, 1,000 feet, where you're actually flushing what might be on that pond, ducks, for instance, and kind of like playing the old game when you're growing up, torpedo. And it's the idea of timing it in such a way that as you're getting ready to flush the ducks off the pond, your bird is in a stoop to be able to catch the ducks. Another difference between the two is I walked in 2.5 days, 23 miles with my birds. With a falcon, you're driving maybe 23 miles to find a pond. You put your bird up, and 10 minutes later, you got a duck, and your bird has just caught a duck. So the difference is I'm on the ground, I'm in the dirt, the other guys are driving around. The end result is obviously the cooperative hunting with your birds, but it's a little different style.
And with the Harris's hawks, you sometimes fly groups of hawks, right?
Yes, and that's what I do. There's 2 focal points. One is cast flying and one is gang hawking. Cast flying is when you have 2 birds or 3 birds or 4 or how many that actually have developed social interactions. We do that. We develop that at home. We fly them together. They get to know each other. Then we have the gang hawking, which might be the fact that I'd like to fly my Harris hawk with your Harris hawk. They don't know each other, and put them together. And the reason why it works so well with Harris's hawks is in the wild, they work together and they live together socially. Brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, they all hunt and they work together cooperatively. So putting together and them interacting together is not unusual to have happen. The difference is that if they get a chance to cast fly, which means they get a chance to fly with each other quite a bit, they learn techniques together along with us on actually how to pursue and hunt the game. I was just out in New Mexico. I have a male hair's hawk and a female hair's hawk that we fly with. My male hair's hawks, two brothers, they were actually all in the nest together. And every year we get together and it's like they're peas and carrots. They know exactly what's going on and how to get out in the field and who does what.
So maybe you could explain what it looks like a typical day if you're going to go out hunting so people can visualize how this works.
I would love to do that. Let me do this because weather's important. I've flown birds in rain. It's not fun. They're wet. Their wings get real heavy. It's more difficult for them to do stuff. So a lovely day would be maybe starting out at about 38 degrees, going up to maybe the very low 60s as the day progresses. It's about taking the birds out. And I'd like to talk somewhere, if you get a chance, I'd like to talk a little bit about their weights, because it's obviously controversial in a lot of terms, especially in the show environment. But I'd like to talk how that kind of crosses over into falconry.
Okay.
But typically what we would do is they travel in what we call giant hoods, which is a box that they love. Mine are aluminum boxes that have a perch inside. They love to, I hate to say they love to go in them, but they do. They're very comfortable in there. They sleep really well and they travel really well. We take them out and put them on the roof of the car and let them kind of acclimate to the environment while I'm putting on my chaps and grabbing up the final stuff, that equipment that I want to have. And they're getting a chance to kind of shake everything off. They're rousting a bit. They're looking over everything. And then we use T-poles, which is just an extended pole, which allows me to give them some additional elevation. It's just if you can imagine a long 8-foot pole with a AstroTurf rolled 3-foot long T at the top, it allows them an opportunity to be a tool in the field. We take off, we start walking, and where we're hunting, I mean, the cottontails and the jackrabbits can be running, a half a mile away. These birds are so keen on it and they're in such great shape, off they go. So off they're flying after they're pursuing the game. They're either going to catch it at that point, or if they don't catch it, because we are actually have the strategy on how we want to address the field and how we want to manipulate and push the game, that instead of going down to where the birds are, we have them fly back to us, and then we continue so we don't lose that strategy in the field. And we pursue game. We can talk a little bit about when they catch and trading off the game. That's very important. But we're out walking in the field. We may walk in one field 3 or 4 miles with the birds, constantly catching flights. We try to go to locations where there's a lot of game accessible to them, and the variety of game is different, and what they decide they want to hunt is different in those same fields. And then once we're kind of tired or we feel we exhausted the field, we bring them back to the vehicle, we load them back up, and then we travel to another location and do it again and again and again and again.
So I think the really important question in all this would be why the birds do this, because they're free flighted through all this. So they're choosing to sit on top of the car, or as you mentioned, go inside the giant hood or fly to that pole perch that you're carrying. They're not getting food at all these locations. You and I, when we get together, we talk a lot about flying birds and the behavioral aspects. So I'd love for you to explain, why do you think the birds choose to go to all these locations? Because you're not giving them a tidbit of food every time they do all those things.
You are absolutely correct. Giving a lot of food in the field is not a real productive way to interact. Let me just say it this way. It's about relationship. And relationship is based on trusting experiences. So whether they're in my house and they're perched out because it's cold outside and I want to have them in, or I'm out in the field, I really focus the attention on the fact that I want them to have a trusting experience, meaning that I'm going to be interacting with them and I become part of that cast. That when we're flying out there, we become one of them. The only thing we can't do is obviously spread wings and fly with them. But what we can do is we can participate with them. And participating with them means that we are actively going to be helping them flush game. We're safely going ahead and interacting with them when we're out actually in the field. The other thing that we try to do is make it enriching for them to be out. And what I mean by that, you go, well, how does enrichment deal with the hunting? I'm going to kind of typically talk right now a little bit about New Mexico, because it's a fabulous place for flights. And there's a lot of pack rat dens, and obviously a great escape hole for a bunny is to go into one of those holes. The hawks may put it in. You don't want to destroy the holes, but we may stick one of the poles down and see if we can reflush. And we have different experiences. Sometimes we do, and we may be able to reflush what they chased in there or not. But we're helping out. And interesting enough, once we've helped out, you can have them jump right back on the pole and continue to pursue. We might be coming across a piece of debris that's out in the field. They've had reinforcement history by finding things underneath it. I tap it, they're right over there to investigate to see what's happening. There is a reinforcement history that we establish with what we see and the way we participate with them in the field. And just as reinforcing as it is for them to be able to fly great distances and walk, many miles and follow right along with us, is when we head back to the vehicle. They're just as content to fly back on the vehicle. We may be ending that particular. I might give them some water when they're out in the field. I have a little bowl, put a little bit of water on it, get them a chance to take a little break, give them a chance to drink some water. And they also have reinforcement history by getting back into the vehicle, traveling to another location that maybe after 5 minutes, maybe after an hour, they get a chance to rest. They get a chance to get back out and do the whole process all over again. But remember, falconry is about catching game. That's the other piece. The other piece is it's not consistent. We may have 100 flights, and out of the 100 flights, we may only end up with 15 head of game. But because of that, that's enough, to keep them interested in what it is we're doing. So we're always looking at ways to keep them engaged. One last thing: if I find that there is a field that we're in and we're not seeing a lot of game, we'll stop, get back to the vehicle, and go to another location. I don't want to have them out there and not have an opportunity to pursue game, especially when we're out there. And by having a location that has lots of game in it, and because they never know what's going on, and they know that we are flushing and we're out there walking with them, that there's a potential that they might get something. I'm going to step into if they get something, because I think that's real unique. Is okay, so let's say they catch a jackrabbit. I'm going to help participate in that. Remember, our birds are maybe 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds, and you got jackrabbits are up to 11 pounds. And they can do a lot of damage, and there's a history of jackrabbits, actually killing Harris's hawks with their rear feet after they catch them. So I want to get involved very quickly with that, and then I want to dispatch the game. I don't want to have this animal that's out here, have to suffer. I want to be able to dispatch as quickly as possible. And then what we do is we trade off the game, meaning I traditionally, because I fly multiple birds, will use maybe a hindquarter of a rabbit. So there's meat for them to be able to have. And we've conditioned them that I can actually put that piece of hindquarter out, and they will release the game to go to that, because they know there's a reinforcement history and they can have quite a bit of food of it. And I just take whatever they caught, put it back in my vest, and wait for them to let that adrenaline kind of come down. And over the years, they've gone from, maybe 10 minutes of waiting for that adrenaline to go down to maybe two minutes to a minute for that. And then we continue the hunt. I think that is just one of the most remarkable things, because they just kind of rouse their feathers a little bit, and they hop right back up to the pole, and boom, they're ready to go again.
So to me, as I'm listening to all that, it makes me think about some things we've talked about in the past about hunting with birds. We've talked about, Premack principle, and how part of this is the opportunity to do the activity that can be reinforcing in itself. And then this intermittent schedule of reinforcement that keeps them doing these behaviors for such a long time. And as you're mentioning, that reinforcement history and that working with you and that seeing you
as a precursor to more reinforcement coming. So there's all these behavior principles that are going on in there. And because of your history with animal training and working with other species, you bring all that into the field in your work with falconry. And so it makes it this really rich experience that allows you to do this really high level of training out in the field, which I think a lot of people don't appreciate unless they see it. This relationship that you have with a bird of prey where it's free to go wherever it wants and it chooses to work with you for such a long period of time. And we're talking free flight. This is really free flight. These birds can go wherever they want. And as you mentioned that while there is I'm sure we'll get into this, while there certainly is a level of motivation to some extent, a lot of it is this natural drive, this modal action pattern to want to hunt as well. It isn't necessarily always about, I'm so in need of food. It's really sometimes just about that desire to go do what they're made to do, which is to capture prey. And as you pointed out, part of the thing of falconry is it was designed to hunt animals and not necessarily for the animal to gorge on a giant rabbit. And so you do that trade-off so that the person doing the hunting can have the meat to prepare food for the family, which is what it was originally about in the long history of falconry to begin with.
You're absolutely correct. And 99% of the game that our birds catch, it goes into the freezer, and that food is utilized during the molt. They need to be able to clean up their feet, their feathers. It's amazing, how much these guys will go into some areas, thorny areas, down into holes. They are in way pursuit. Their feet get scratched up and stuff. And that molt during the summer usually will put them up, gives them a chance to recuperate their whole bodies during, from all the abuse that they've taken during that particular time. But back to your thought on those guys out in the field like that is, the one thing we do not want to have is a hungry bird. A hungry bird doesn't do anything for us in the field because there's no interest in pursuing anything other than all I want to do is sit on your glove and get food. We do not want that. That is not an engagement. And to me, that's irresponsible of myself if I ever get my birds to that point. I definitely, absolutely, positively want to have a bird that's totally interested in participating in the casting activities that we have in the field. It's just not fun for the bird. It's not fun for us. I've seen that happen with people in the field before where they're wondering why their bird isn't going after game or why they're not participating. And you have this bird that's clinging to a glove and doesn't want anything else but to get some food. And oh my God, that's just a ridiculous thing to have happen when you have such great opportunities to take a look at what your bird is weighing and when they're in a really great frame to participate. And we have to remember the other side of it, which is when they're on the heavier side. In the wild, these birds may be sitting waiting for some activity to happen, meaning a rat's going to run out or a jack or whatever it might be. And they're sitting up there for hours and hours and hours and hours waiting for the right opportunity to catch something. And when they do catch it, they're going to eat as much as they can of that. And then they're going to sit for maybe a day or two and wait for that to metabolize. They're going to look to cast out whatever casting material they've eaten before they hunt again. Okay, so if I take that same thought process of what the wild's like, then I'm going to go ahead and intertwine that into my falconry. I do not want to have a bird that's way overweight, and I don't want to have a bird that's extremely hungry. But we have been able to, over the years, take a look at what a huge range these guys have in their activity to participate out in there. And you can obviously identify that behavior. You can see a bird that's too hungry or a bird that's not. Now, I might have my birds and I might fly them a little heavier. It doesn't mean that they may not participate in what it is that's going on, but they may be less active. They might be looking to the other bird to participate more, and then they kind of come in because these birds also have a strategy of one bird, taking game, the other bird then coming in to be able to do that. When we're out in the field, we find that if you have that bird in a really nice range, and that's developed over time, that it's not all about the food. It's about the catch. It's about the pursuit. And even if I miss it, by gollies, I can do it again. And to be able to see the birds miss and then get back up and continue to pursue and they miss and they continue to pursue and they catch it. Oh my God, can you imagine? It's just like an experience that we would have of trying to reach a goal and not quite getting there, but getting close and trying again and not getting it, trying again, and then getting it. And that feeling, all of that's happened, that whole experience is reinforcing. The part that ends it is, okay, in our case, they eat some food, they're kind of done with it, and then they're ready to do it all over again, because that whole series of behaviors that have happened is what's motivating us. And that's what's motivating me.
Absolutely. I think that adrenaline rush or whatever chemical reaction is going on in their brain when they actually catch something has got to be reinforcing. I can't imagine it's just about getting the food.
I want that rush as much as they want that rush. And when we do catch it, because we've spent so much time training them, once we go ahead and look at that trading off, they get that concept and they get off the food right away as well. I wanted to mention the reality is, as a practitioner of behavior, I'm always looking at that in the field constantly. What is going to motivate them? What is going to keep them active? What do I want to ignore and not pay attention to? I look at the behavior I don't want and I don't reinforce it. And I look at the behavior I want and I reinforce it. So it's not just the fact that I'm letting the bird go off and do their thing. I've been more focused on, because I'm very interested in it, is the behavior that continues to motivate in all the different times in the field. If from the first time we take them out at 8 o'clock in the morning to the last flights at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, what are the different things that I need to keep going after catching all this game and having all this activity, that I still have a participant that wants to be out there to flying together. So we're always looking at the behavior of the animal. We're always looking at what it is that's going to keep them engaged. And it goes back to building that relationship and having it based on the trusting experiences that we have.
So tell me again, how long would you say you're out in the field working with the birds throughout the day?
So sometimes too long. A typical day, because we're traveling almost 8 hours to get to our location, is that we may start at 8 o'clock and we'll end around 4:30 when the sun's starting to drop. That's how long we're out in the field. Yes,
You're flying?
8, 9, 10. Well, here, what we got to remember, we all need breaks.
Yeah.
If I'm walking 8 miles in a day, I need a chance to take a break and hydrate and eat and take like 15, 20 minutes out. So what we do, we actually have 3 birds that we fly. We have a young male that we're getting involved in the cast. And what we'll do is, when we've worked at a field real hard and we've got the birds and we almost watch ourselves. If we're the ones that are tired, we're figuring the birds are maybe a little tired too. So we take ourselves a small break, or if we're traveling to a new location, we're taking a break, and then we're getting back out again and going. In the field, we may bring some sandwiches, have a sandwich or whatever, to take a break. The birds are relaxing. They've had water. They're in the boxes. And then we find a new location and out we go again. That duration, we build on that. And it's amazing the strength that these birds and the distances that they can fly because of doing this. It's not like we just started off saying, let's go 8 hours out in the field when we've only had them out, in the fields for half an hour, 45 minutes. We build on that. And once we all kind of take a look at when we need to take some breaks. The other side of the spectrum is, let's say we've caught a couple of jackrabbits. That exerts so much energy out of the birds that we may need to take a little bit of a longer break so they can regroup themselves. But we're always watching the activity of the birds and what they're doing and monitor that. And, we use ourselves, obviously, like I was saying, as a bit of a barometer. If I'm tired and I need to take a break, I'm assuming the birds do too. Or you see the birds that are out there and they've been working so hard, you just need to give them a break. We were out the other day with the 4 birds we were flying, and we had a discussion about that in the middle of the field, is the fact that even in the middle of the field, we will take a break. Maybe after a catch, we'll sit there, the birds will sit on the poles, we'll just kind of hang out, have a conversation, look at the strategy of what's going on, and just make a decision on, we're going to take a big, deep breath, give birds a little bit of water, and continue to pursue what we're doing. And you can always tell if there's so much activity still left in that field as we walked back towards those vehicles. Traditionally, if the field, the way the birds are is if we're out in the field and there hasn't been a lot of game, we start to walk back around the vehicle, they may fly back to the vehicle. But if the game is still going and we're in the field for a long time, we can walk right by those vehicles. The birds are still on the poles and they're still actively hunting, is another good indicator for us. So it goes back to, we're always watching the behavior that's occurring in the field and making decisions based on the behavior, not on necessarily my want to continue, but it's more on whether or not I'm going to have an active participant and I'm going to have that trusting experience out in the field.
Well, just so I have a visual of this. So when you're talking about taking a break, the birds are not necessarily enclosed or anything. They're just sitting on the poles. They're free to fly if they want to.
Oh, Barbara, I have them. They fly back to the vehicle. I'm eating a sandwich. They're on top of the car with a foot up, looking at everything that's going on. I'm drinking, we're eating, we're having chats, we're doing all, and the birds are just sitting out there. They're not going anywhere. And now if they choose to go somewhere, go ahead and go, but 99% of the time they aren't. And a lot of that, I think, is reflected in the fact that we're all together as a team. If we're going, they're going. If we're sitting, they're sitting. And remember, in the wild, they spend a lot of time sitting and waiting for things. It's not like they're jumping around like, let's go, come on, let's go. They're just sitting up there and they're absorbing the environment and they're watching what's going on. To me, that becomes that activity that's that human and the animal, the bonding that's occurring, and we're both doing the same thing at the same time. We're both having a bit of a downtime. We're both going ahead and rejuvenating our batteries, because I'll tell you, as soon as we close everything up and the pole's back out, they're jumping to the pole and let's go. No, during that time, there's no restraining them. And restraint, it has to be looked at as a safety feature. I look at it as a safety feature. When I'm flying in a cast, I like to have one Jess with one piece on it so that I have the abilities, as I'm trading off two birds on game, that if one wants to get back in, I can actually, make sure I'm restraining him by holding that leash, just so that we can go ahead and trade off and be ready to go again. But it's not necessarily for any other reason other than make sure that it's safe for both birds that are out there. But that kind of becomes a beginning point. As you do it over the years, it's really unique as they learn at different times that I shouldn't even worry about getting it. You caught it, you eat it, and we've reinforced the behavior of the other bird not getting involved in it. So that way it allows an easy trade-off. Or if we've got two birds on it and we know which bird caught it, we're still going to reinforce the bird that helped. And that bird starts looking at us, not looking at the game, but looking at us like, are you ready for me to jump off? So, we are always training in that environment to what it is we want. Can I tell a quick story about that?
Yeah, of course.
We actually, because there's a lot, obviously the escape for any of the bunnies or whatever is to get into a hole, whether it's in the side of a mountain or if it's a pack rat den. And we were out with the birds and my male caught a bunny and he is in the hole. The bunny's in the hole. He has a hold of it in the hole. The only part of his body that's out is his back and one wing. And in the past, when I've tried to intervene in doing that, the bird's usually releasing it. So I'm like, I'm going to take the tactic to allow him to do it. I want to see what it looks like. And I watched him slowly manipulate that bird by using his wings and using them as leverage to help him push that out of the hole. While that's happening, we have our female who is on the ground who could go in there, and it's not. She's just hanging out with us while we're all watching this. So the bird's watching, my wife is watching, and I'm watching this whole action. My male is turning around, taking a look to see what's going on, making those slow little moves. He goes from one wing to two wings, and then all of a sudden you see him take his tail, and he moves his tail out. And again, the rabbit is still alive. He still has a hold of it. He's still pulling it out. He's using his wings to push and use the leverage to come out. Once he gets it to a point where he's pushed it out far enough, our female then goes in and grabs it. And now it's easy for us to grab it at the same time. So we now have a group participation. but we're allowing the bird to do what it needs to do without intervening in it. And we only intervene when we get to a point where we can safely go ahead and help out. And this has happened multiple times in different situations, but it's so exciting to be able to see it because the other bird knows, don't worry about it. He's got it. And then I need to go, I don't need to worry about it. He's got it. And then we need to know when to intervene. And then it goes through the whole trade-off. And it's just a remarkable experience to be able to have that.
There's a couple things that I keep thinking about as you're telling these stories. One, that you guys, the humans, are just such conditioned reinforcers for the animals. They understand that you lead to good things. So they get your role. And that, like when you were saying about sitting around taking a break, they know they should stick around you because you lead to good things. So we're all sitting here taking a break. Might as well hang around with you. You're going over there to lift up that debris. You lead to potential prey. So I might as well stick around with you. So I love that. And then the other thing that I really love about this story, which I'm hoping people now visualize, is that you're out in the field with these animals that are free to go where they want all day long, even when you're taking a break, and you've got huge duration because of these intermittent schedules of reinforcement and variable ratio, right? And variable reinforcement, yes, which I know you are a fan of and very familiar of, thanks to your marine mammal training days, which you're welcome to talk about more. And again, people don't realize that this is what's possible. And it's just about training strategies. It's not about withholding food or creating great levels of hunger. This is how we create great duration using training strategies.
The food in the field that I discovered is more of a detriment to the training and the activity in the field. I don't want that to be in the environment. And when I'm out with my birds, no matter where it is, the only time they see food is when I'm trading off. Because remember, I've got this large piece of game here and I got this little bit of tidbit here that I want them to see. But if I've got them and they're flying back from different locations, I may or may not have food in the glove. They have no idea. There's no visual food to that. I don't want them to be looking at it. The other thing is that they compete for food, and we don't want to have a competition out there because I don't want them to be having, and remember, I'm flying multiple birds with the same idea in mind. I don't want them to be looking at food as that whole source. What I do want is I want them thinking about pursuing the game, and that's when my opportunity is. Whether I catch it or not, if I participated, I have an opportunity for reinforcement. If I haven't participated, somebody else caught it and the other one didn't participate, they're not getting reinforced for it. It's simple. There isn't anything really complicated about it, but because we have multiple experiences doing that, they pick up on that. And it's so wonderful to be able to see it. There's nothing harder than having multiple birds you're trying to get off of a prey. But I will say that the experiences they have working together. We just caught a jackrabbit the other day. The female went in. I'm going to use names. Leica's the female and Pierce is the male, and they're both hunting. Different strategy for jackrabbits with them than cottontails. Interesting. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit. But what happened is she came in and she pursued the jack. She grabbed the jack by the head. Now the jack is now bucking like a bronco. It brushes her off. As she's brushed off, Pierce, the male, comes in and grabs the bird, the jackrabbit by the head, which gives her a second or two to regain her composure and then grab onto it. So, and then that gave me time to now get in, and now I've got a hold of it with her. He has, if it wasn't for Pierce, the male, that jackrabbit would have got away. He intervened enough to get her back on it. After that whole situation, he just stood there probably about a foot or two away. He didn't decide to get back involved in what was going on, that he just stood there. My wife came over. I was able to go ahead and start the dispatching process with the jackrabbit. Pierce looks straight up at my wife. She takes out some food to reinforce him. Leica's on the ground with the jackrabbit. And again, after I dispatch it, I let her kind of work on it a little bit. And again, I can either trade it off right away, or I can allow her an opportunity to what's called breaking into it, just so she's pulling fur and she's getting reinforced a little bit differently. And I can always tell when that's efficient, because once I go ahead to trade off, she just steps right off of it and I can put the jackrabbit back in. So we want to talk about cooperative hunting. The two of those guys stopping it, me coming in and helping out. Pierce got reinforced for helping out, even though he didn't make the initial final catch. And the female ends up, and we all shake it off. I give a little bit of water, and I like to give them water after that. I have a little spray bottle, and I spray them down and spray the blood and feathers and get all that off of them. 2 seconds later, boom, we're out and we're flying again. Spent enough time together. We don't change up so many things that they have to guess what we're doing, because of the experiences. And I think that's another important point, is that you don't want to create a lot of indecisiveness. You want to have some consistencies in what you do. Even though every catch is different, there are still some norms. There's some basic elements that don't change. How we trade off, what they get if they help out, what if they do if they're both on game together, how that all works. We do it real similar. And most falconers who are flying multiple birds need to look at that. You could fly one bird and do kind of whatever you want, but when you fly multiple birds at a time, or you got 4 birds, which we were just doing this weekend, you really have to have a good way. You have to have somebody orchestrating it. You know, I'm the captain of the ship. My bird caught it. You tell me what I need to do to help. How do I get your bird off the game? How do you get the next bird off the game? You know, and then how do you do all those transfers? You have somebody almost calling it out there, like a coach, who's doing what and where. And when you have enough of those experiences, and because it's being done real similar, the birds pick up on it too. And because of the years of doing it and the experiences that we have, we're able to go ahead and make it a real safe experience. And that doesn't happen overnight, okay? Because you start at the very beginning. Your basics don't change from the very beginning when you're starting your bird out to where it is 8 years from now. The difference is because of all the trials you've had and all the successes you've had, you now have it set up where this next one is very predictable, and the birds like that predictability just like we do. And it really works very smoothly and seamlessly. Can you tell I like this? I mean, talk about my marine mammal days. We used to take our walrus and our sea lions out for walks in the park, and we'd take them down. At SeaWorld in Florida, where I worked, we'd have them load up on the back of a cart. So it was open. You know, there's no fencing, there's no gate, there's no nothing. And it's just, they get on the back of the cart. We'd take them down to the lake and we'd go swimming with them. It was the closest to the free environment that we could get, because you have a stadium, you have, not that they couldn't go over the glass and go somewhere, but the reality is you have such a strong relationship that I always look at it as the rest of the world gets grayed out and you don't see it. It's all about the moment. So you've got these really unique animals that you're taking out to the water and you're interacting with them, no different than you would if they were in the stadium environment. And because of that, because of the relationship you built, because of the you're paying attention to what's going on with all the variables in the environment, and you're proactively approaching it that way, you could take them out into the wild and do the same thing. And that was always something that I wanted to do with the killer whales, is we have this great relationship. We should go out in the wild and hunt together. Well, I kind of do that. I've got the wolves of the sky. I got the Harris hawks doing the same thing that you couldn't technically or logically be able to get out with these other marine mammals, but I can now do this and transfer it over to the Harris hawks. Over the years, it's been great because I've kind of used the wild and the hawks as my laboratory on testing behaviorally how much I can stretch my relationship, and then taking that back and then applying it in my marine mammal world. So I had this great laboratory, years ago when we were experimenting with food and weights and kilocalories and everything else. I used my hawks as an opportunity to help me understand a little bit more about what we were doing with the animals at SeaWorld. But at the same time, because we developed such strong relationships with the whales, and we weren't focused on feeding everything, and we would do a whole show without food, we would do it off of all these other reinforcers that we created, I would then take that out with me into the wild. So I had these two perfect worlds. I had one where I could experiment on my own, but being in an environment with a lot of other people in the marine mammal world, there were parameters, but I could still work into those parameters. So I had these two really wonderful worlds. And so even though I've been doing this, I think over 45 years now, I still feel like it's just as new as it was when I was first learning, how to do this and how to develop into it. And recently that word anthropomorphic has been coming more and more. And again, when I first started with SeaWorld, that was a no-no word. We didn't use anthropomorphism at all because it was like, oh, how do you prove it? But I'm seeing it. It's right there in front of me. I'm seeing these birds do some really remarkable things, and they're in a bit of a predicament. They've caught a bunny, and they've got their two legs wrapped around a branch, and they've caught this bunny, and they're kind of like, I can't let go, because if I do, to move my one foot, it might get away. So I see the birds trusting me enough that they're actually turning and looking at me, which to me, I can now get involved. I'm now getting involved, and together, we're working that environment out together, and they know I'm not going to release that bunny. I don't want it to go anywhere. It's yours. You caught it. And now I have an opportunity for you to release that one because I've got it. And now I can pick you and that bunny up out of that crazy thorny bushes, and I can carry you over where we can safely dispatch, and we can safely get it taken care of. And I've never seen it more than this year than I've ever seen it in this is the 8th year we've been flying these birds, that I've had these birds turning and looking at me. So we obviously, through the repetitions of the catches we've had, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of them, is they're now looking in my anthropomorphized situation, they're looking to me for help now. Either I need it or I don't, and they're reaching out, and because I'm seeing this, I'm stepping in the right time because they're helping me understand that, and we're having much more successes, and it's a much more enriching opportunity for me and for the birds when we're out there. It's just crazy stuff, but it's exciting.
Yeah, no, I love that you're sharing that. What I see is this. What I love to see in animal trainers is the lifetime learning, right? That we never stop learning from our experiences as animal trainers. And I love that your birds keep teaching you things.
Always. I'm always looking at creating an active learner. That's my goal. Well, I also have to be an active learner. Because when you're out in the wild, every situation is different. There's not a duplicated one. There's no duplication to anything, ever. It just doesn't happen. That's not reality. But you can have some baselines. And the baselines are what keeps us joined together and allows us to be able to get out there and cooperatively do what we are doing in an environment that's totally changing and evolving. But still we have the consistencies that allow us to interact with our environment. And to have the birds going through it the same way we're going through it, and to have that time when you're so connected to what's going on. I've seen us do some chases that are over a mile, and the birds have put whatever they chased into a cotton rat hole, and because I'm stopping and watching because the flights are just incredible, and they're flushing it, and then I see them sitting on the pile. And they've looked through the holes, and we're still walking because we're kind of interested. You see them both turn as we're coming, like, oh, good, we got help. And then we get to that location, and we get somebody up on a pole so strategically it can easily. We have one that's kind of working the pile a little bit. Out pops a bunny, and they catch it or they don't. But again, they're looking to us. They could fly away. They can go do their thing on their own. But no. They're interested in us. And then if they catch it or they don't, they're like, oh, well, let's go on. I'm still ready to go. It's thrilling.
Absolutely. I always said the reason I got into the animal industry, especially animal training, was because of the relationship that you can have with an animal. And it sounds like what you're experiencing is absolutely the ultimate of that.
Because it's winter time, usually when we're most active with them, if it gets to be anywhere into the 30s, we bring them in at night, and they're all perched out in the house. I never see them as comfortable. They're immediately tucking their head and going to sleep. They've got a foot up right away. They're really interested in what's going on in the house. They're watching the activities, the dogs walking between them, us, whether I'm cooking or whether I'm actively doing something. Which brings me to something that's really important, that I think is important, is that I want my birds to be able to see a lot that goes on in the environment. Everybody does something different, obviously, and everybody's successful, and I would never knock anybody for the way that they do stuff. But what I found that's been really successful is that I want the animals that I have, and I've got a lot of different animals besides the hawks at my house, I want them all to either interact with themselves or visually be able to interact. And what I mean by that is a typical mew, which is a place to house the raptors, is a box with bars that protects them from the outer elements and allows them to, free flight themselves within it. I'm a little different. I've got a 12 by 12 by 10 foot cage, and it has small enough bars that stuff can't crawl into it, so they're safe from the outside predators, but they can see 365 degrees. They can see us, and I also positioned it so they can see into the house, so they can actually see through the glass. They can see the macaws that we have. I've got a tortoise, he's 75 pounds, and he's always hanging out next to the mew warming up to begin with, and they're there too. I believe that if they can interact with the environment around them and it's not restricted, what happens when they do get into your environment is it's not like, oh, this is all new, what do I look at? They're already there. And I want them to be able to see how my family lives, how my wife and I are, how we're active with stuff. If I'm out working in the yard, I want the birds to be able to see me. Because I think that translates to what happens when we get out into the field. They already know my mannerisms. You know as well as I do, Barbara, that the animals pick up on our mannerisms. They know, they can read us better than we can read each other. And I want them to do that. I want them to be able to have that opportunity, so there's no surprises, because we spend a lot of time with them. In falconry, Barbara, that there's the term manning, which is it's basically exposing them to the environment. But I want to take it a step further, and that is my birds will come in, and I'll either interact with them as a group or separately. I might be watching TV, and each bird is getting an hour on my fist while we're watching TV. I want them in the environment. I want to be able to touch them appropriately. We have restrictions as humans. I can't come up and I might be able to touch you on your shoulder and you're comfortable, or I come up and I pull you to shoulder, it makes you uncomfortable. I want to learn each of the birds and what my respect level is in order for those to occur. And I'm always working on that, because in the field, we're picking them up. We're having to manipulate them off of different situations. I want them to know that I'm not going to be hurting them, going back to trusting experiences. And I think that translates to everyday life, not just the field, because we spend a tremendous amount of time outside the field interacting with the birds as much as we do when they're in the field. We're preparing them, the athletes, we're getting them ready, we're getting them out there. But I want them to know that if I'm going to come down and I'm going to get close to you because we're trying to manipulate this game that's stuck in the middle of all this stuff, I want you to trust that I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to create a safe environment for you, and that we're going to be able to get through it really safely. And I believe that happens by exposing them and having them involved in our environment. And I always looked at it as the animals live in our world. I don't live in their world, they live in my world, and they've got to learn how to live in my world. But I need to be able to watch their behavior to understand what my limitations are, what my particular restrictions are per each bird. And I think that's just super important. And that's not just for birds, it's for everything. It's for any animal you interact with. You can't just walk out and then one day go, I'm going to start working with them. They're like, well, I don't know who you are. I want them to know. I want that detail to know. And I've done that with every single animal I've ever interacted with. And everybody always asks, well, what was your favorite animal? And I said, the animal that I have at that moment. The animal I'm interacting with at that moment is my most favorite animal. And because of that, I treat each animal that way. I treat them as if they're all my attention at that moment, and that it's not I'm having to work with you, because our bodies pick up on the way that we're mentally, feeling. So I always try to look at it as I want that interaction to be the best interaction that they ever had at that moment. So that's for us to practice as humans, and I practice it all the time, as well as bring the animals into that world so they can practice it also.
I hope you enjoyed part 1 of our discussion about falconry with Al Kordowski. Part 2 is going to be coming out soon, so hang on. I'm sure you can tell that Al has a lot of enthusiasm for this subject matter. That's why it was so much fun to talk to him. Now, I want to get into one of your training questions. The question I received was about training 2 animals that live together, which is obviously a common situation. And the challenge this person has is she wants to see if she can train the 2 animals to go to 2 different targets so that she can manage the behavior of the 2 different animals, in particular trying to get the sloths, these are the animals that we're talking about here, to go to a scale when she wants them to. Now, one of the strategies I like to use to train animals to separate or go where I want them to is to train each individual to go to a target. And you may have seen a post that I've put on social media about training animals to go to what we call name tags, which is specific targets. And certainly that's a strategy that can be used here. But one of the questions this particular person has is that she's having a hard time getting one of the animals started on the name tag or the specific target. Usually what it takes when you're having a problem getting a behavior started is what we would call smaller approximations. So you might need to start with a little bit less behavior. So what does that mean? That means try not to ask for so much behavior. In other words, if the animal does the slightest little bit, a tiny orientation, even looks at your target, you're going to reinforce that action. And it might even be just giving food next to that target at first. And a lot of times what I'm trying to do is I might try to create an accidental orientation towards that target and giving myself an opportunity to reinforce that. So I might even hold food in a way that the animal accidentally engages with it so that I can deliver reinforcers afterwards. But that's just one part of the situation here that we can talk about, because it sounds like one animal is getting the idea of targeting and that the other animal isn't quite getting the idea. And again, there's many different ways to get to a solution to your behavior problem. So targeting is just one strategy that you can use. Another thing that was pointed out here is that this individual would like to get the animals to get onto a scale. And I'm assuming what you're talking about is maybe a hanging scale of some sort, having them climb to that. I'm not a person that has a problem with luring in the beginning stages. Luring is a valid way to get an animal to do an action so that you can reinforce it. So you might in the beginning just want to show that animal food to get the animal to go over towards that hanging thing that you're using as your scale. That would be my objective at first. Just lure the animal over there so you build some sort of reinforcement history for going to that location where that scale is hanging, so the animal learns to hang on that particular branch or rope that you're using for that scale. And that will teach the animal that's a good location to go to. And eventually what you can do is maybe start tapping and then delivering food, a little tap over here, deliver food, and the animal can start learning that as your target as opposed to a specific object that the animal needs to orient to. Sometimes targeting can be a little harder of an activity to get started, or a way to get an activity started, than it is to just lure. And then eventually you're just going to phase out the luring aspect of it. So for me, luring is just another way to get an action started so that you can reinforce it, just like targeting is a way to get an action started so that you can reinforce it. And both of those are things that you can fade out once the animal understands what action it is doing that earns reinforcers. So you might consider that as a way to get the behavior started. You do have one animal that's already targeting, so if you want to take advantage of that as a way to move that one individual out of the way when you need to, great, that's fine, while the other animal is still learning what behavior it needs to do. And maybe that other animal, you use the luring to get the action started, and then eventually once that behavior is on cue, you can just use that cue to tell the animal to go to the scale, and then use maybe tapping or luring to get it to go away until it understands the specific behavior that is the signal to move away from the scale. So that might be a strategy for that particular situation there. Of course, I'm only going off of the words that I got emailed to me, so there's probably more information that will help me solve that problem for you. But those are some tips that might get you started. And again, always remember, if an animal isn't quite doing what you want, a good strategy is to think about breaking it down into even tinier steps if possible. Because one of the comments that was in there is maybe the animal doesn't want to learn or just can't learn. But we do know that animals do learn and can learn. It's just a matter of about us having to break it down a little bit more or figure out what we can do to help them learn. Because they are learning. That's how they survive, right? All right. So I hope that made sense. If not, you can always send me another message and I'll try to break it down a little bit more for you. And again, you can submit your questions on any of the podcast episode web pages, and I will do my best to try and choose a few here and there that I can answer on social media or on the podcast. And speaking of the podcast, if you've been enjoying it, hey, why don't you let us know? Give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that always helps us appear more in the search engines, and hopefully more people will find our podcast and use the information here to help them when they train their animals. All right, that's it for this week. Don't forget animaltrainingfundamentals.com. If you'd like to learn more about animal training, you can always try it out for 10 days for just $1. Use the code TRY10days when you pick your membership option. And I'll look forward to seeing you again here on Animal Training Fundamentals with Barbara Heidenreich. Bye, everybody. If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family.